animating a classic children's book using AI. So a friend of mine, Mick Lemoynian, bought the rights to this famous children's book, The Runaway Rollerskate. It's a beautiful book by John Vernon Lord. It's got some wonderful images in here, very stylized images, very beautiful. And my brief was, could I bring it to life using AI? Which is what I've done. But the process isn't quite as simple as you might think. So I'm just going to take you through how I did this. Well, you might think that's easy. You just take each of the pages, scan them at the highest resolution possible, and then throw them into AI with the appropriate prompt in order to animate them and bring them to life. But the thing is, AI is taught on real images and real video. As soon as you start to stylize an image by, hand-drawn images, for instance, or hand-drawn illustrations, it starts to throw the AI off. And also, if you look at one of the images, here's one of the pages at random, there's so much. If you look at the cockerel there, the cockerel sitting on the back of the boat, you can see that its feathers really blend in with the trees in the background. And, the detail of the boat and the net. AI is not going to be able to tell what is what here. Got some geese here, we've got a white duck. It's not going to be able to tell that that's a white duck against the waves. We've got a frog down here. There's lots of different detail. Writing a prompt in order to animate all of these and animate the water is going to be problematic at best. But look, I tell you what, let's try first of all by throwing it into AI and see what it does. Now, the first problem we're going to get is that because we scanned it at a high resolution, the file is just going to be too big. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is compress that file down to a size that an AI will be able to handle it. So you can see if I open up this tool and just look, it was 6.7 megabytes. That's too big for the AI. So we're going to reduce this down by size. Let's bring that down to, say, 10 by, let's look at it as pixels, 1400. This is lower than the resolution we would want. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that 1920 by 1480. You can see it's not a landscape picture. This brings it down to 1.7, which is probably a bit more realistic for an AI. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take that image, I'm going to go into Cling, and I'm going to click on Generate, add the image which I've compressed, which I've called Example, and then put in here as the prompt, man rows boat up the river whilst the cockerel flaps and squawks. The geese and ducks swim out of the way. Okay, let's spell cockerel properly, and let's make that 5 seconds and generate that. So that's generating now. Just 5 seconds. Normally I generate a 10-second clip when I'm doing AI generation, but we'll have a look and see how that comes out. Okay, so that has rendered out now. Let's press play and have a look. And actually this is not too bad. It's a lot better than I thought it was going to be. You can see it's animated the man. The ducks seem to be doing, these geese at the back here don't seem to be doing anything. It does seem to have separated the cockerel and the boat from the trees in the background. We've got the flag is flapping, that's nice. We've got some waves here and all the water's moving. And these ducks, it seems to have, this one here kind of does some weird morphing and then it just disappears behind the reeds here. These ducks kind of go and suddenly disappear. So it's done a much better job than I was expecting actually, and that's really testament to how far AI has come on. But there's a few things here. The boat isn't moving up the river. These geese in the background aren't moving. And as I say, there's some strange there's some weird stuff going on with the duck here. These little ducklings kind of morph and turn into weird shapes and then disappear. I don't know what this duck is doing. It's kind of frozen, it starts moving and then it freezes again. So we've got issues. In order to do this, and this cockerel jumps up in the air and it's kind of half sitting on the boat and half sitting on the oar. And actually, if we were to look at some of the other images, I suspect there's a level of complexity in some of these other images. For instance, if I move on ahead to an image like this, is it going to be able to tell what is what? And the key bit of information here, or the key bit of visual information here, is this mouse, which is outside the window. Now, in order to animate this, I want this mouse to fly behind the cockerel, behind these vents, and then I want the camera to essentially track the mouse as if the camera's flown outside of the window. This is going to be very difficult. There's going to be a lot of weird morphing going on. And then, of course, if we were to look at an image like this, where you can see the cockerel is down here, it's behind some branches, and here's the man. I want these guys to move through the trees, and I want the camera to follow them. I also want the camera to pick out these details of birds up in the trees. I'm simply not going to have enough control to be able to animate that as I would like. As easy as it would be to just throw it into AI and do it that way. So this is how I'm getting the control that I need. The first thing I have to do, it's a lot more time consuming, but it gives me the control that I want, is I've got to take each of those images and cut them up into layers. So let me show you what I mean. So here is that image we've just looked at. Actually, this image goes across 2 pages. So I've taken the 2 pages and joined them up as best I can. They don't fully align, so I had to move this this bit of the tree down to align it with the branch, but you can still see a line down here. But there's a few key bits of detail. Here's the mouse, which has stolen this roller skate, and they're chasing the mouse through the book, through the story. Hence, that's why the book is called The Runaway Rollerskate. And I want the camera to track them going behind the trees and through this wooded area behind the leaves, chasing the mouse. And I also want to see the mouse going through the woods as well. There's no way at all that I'm going to be able to get AI to recognize those elements and animate them going through the trees. It's going to be much easier for me to have the control that I need to be able to break that down into layers. So the easiest and simplest way, and by the way, I think this is where we're at with AI tools right now. It's not about using AI necessarily to generate the final images, but using AI as a tool in the production process to give us more control and more flexibility, and to give us time efficiencies. Now, the proper way of doing this is to take each page as a reference image and then create separate pages. And there are in-betweening AI, in-betweening tools out there. But again, it would need me to create separate detailed images of the movement. Now, the other thing as well that I need with this, because of the timing of the words against the image in the book, I'm going to need to create different shots. So actually, the best way of doing this is by giving myself control over the elements in each image. So I'm simply going to cut it out into layers using Photoshop. So what I've done is I've gone into this image and I have basically removed parts of the image, and I've done that with all of these images, and I'll show you the way that I do it. If we just zoom in on an image, it's very simple really. Let's say I want this tree to be in the foreground and everything else to be in the background, then I have got to go and cut this tree out. So what I will do is I will go around the tree and basically cut it out with an eraser, doing it roughly to begin with, and then I go back and create more detailed cuts out in between the branches, and I'll go through and cut this out like this. Now, I've seen enough cookery shows to know that the line that I need to give you right now is, here's one that I've done earlier. So you can see if I come down here, I'm going to switch that off. There's the original image. Let's go back to how it was before. You can see I've already started cutting out these foreground trees. Now I haven't done it all yet. I've cut this tree out and these foreground trees here. I've got to go and cut all the background out in between the trees, and then of course I've got to cut these birds out and make those as separate layers in here, which I haven't done yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you one that I've fully done before already. So here is that pencil image that we saw. So here's our cartoon character here sitting in amongst loads of pencils, and he is sharpening these pencils. There's a cockerel up here sitting on top of the pencils who's spotted the mouse, who's managed to fly past the window on his roller skate. So again, if I was to throw this into AI, it may well recognize the man here, but I think it would be very confused by all these pencils. It certainly, I think, wouldn't know, despite careful prompting, to put this behind the blind. So the easiest way of doing this, and certainly the way that gives me the most control, is to cut this into layers. So here's the image. You can see I've actually extended the size of this image off the side here because I want the camera to follow this mouse as it flies off. So essentially the camera is going through the window and then following the mouse as it flies off over the city. So what I've done is I've basically copied this layer, and then I've cut different elements of this layer out. So here are all the foreground pencils. You can see I've gone around and cut those out. Then we've got the background pencils here. Let's just have a look at that original image and you can see how it is. Here's the background pencils. Now you'll notice if I switch this background layer on, I've actually used AI to create more pencils behind the foreground. So that allows me to start creating movement as the camera tracks left and right. So things move at different speeds, which will make the animation look that much more special. So you can see I've created even more pencils there. Then we've got the office background. So this, and I've created as much of that as I need. Now you'll notice I've cut out the blind. So where you get this checkerboard, for those of you who don't know Photoshop, that's all transparent. So I can see through the checkerboard. So the pencils in this case are behind the office, but if I move that layer up, you'll see how that works. Now the background pencils are in front of the background of the office wall, and this is all I need. And if I switch on the foreground pencils and move those up above, you'll see they're now in the foreground. So as I switch off the background pencils, you can see how these layers are stacking up. Now I've also created the view out the window, and I've used AI to extend that a little bit. We're going to blur this so it doesn't need to be too detailed. Then we've got our cartoon man, and I've actually used AI to create an extra bit which will be out of view. If I switch the foreground pencils on, you can see he sits behind these foreground pencils, and then we have the midground pencils, which are now behind him. You can see this layer is behind the man, which is the Elwood layer. So if I switch off the man, the layer with the man, you can see the pencils are behind him. And if I switch off the midground, you can see that just leaves us with the foreground pencils. So we've also got a separate layer for the cockerel, and I've cut that out using the eraser and various other tools. Then we've got the mouse who's sitting in this roller skate on a folded up paper dart, and then we have got, that's the whole thing. Then we've got, as we saw, the, where is it, then we got the view out of the window. So let's look at, this is the view out the window. If I take the office background and put it above the window background and switch it on, you can see the window view appears behind the office view, which is what I want. And you remember the checkerboard bit is transparent, so anything that's checkerboard is transparent. So that will reveal the layer underneath. So what I've done is I've cut this image here up into different layers by literally just sitting here and cutting out. It's actually quite time consuming, but it's very simple. It's quite therapeutic actually. You could argue, well, couldn't you use AI to separate those layers? And again, to some extent you could. If it was a real image, actually something like Runway would work really well at cutting out those backgrounds. But because it's a very stylized cartoon, the AI is likely to get confused about which bit is which. As we saw in that earlier example, it did much better than I thought it would actually. But I need more control over the elements. I want to control each element. Now the thing is, once I've got these individual layers, then what I can do is I can take that layer and as a simple image with a cutout background and just animate that layer. Now if you imagine the prompt that I would have to write to tell the AI that this is a man sitting in a pile of pencils and he's actually sharpening a pencil here, and I want him to look round and look surprised as the cockerel starts pointing out the window at the mouse who's flying by outside of the window, and then to control the movement of the camera, that's all going to, well, actually that's going to take a lot more time trying to create the right prompt, even if it worked in the first place. So what I've done here is I've cut it out into separate layers and then used the AI to animate those separate layers, and then in the editing program put those layers back together. Now once I've composited those layers back on top of each other, I can nest those layers and control the camera movement. So let's have a look at how that works. Now here's the man that we cut out, and what I've done is I've composited him against green because then it just makes it easier to composite him, and I've given it a very simple prompt, and I actually did this several times. So here he is sharpening his pencils, looking down at the pencil, and then looking surprised as the cockerel, which I have created a separate layer. And again, once I've cut that layer out, I've put that against a CSO green, and so I can composite that back into my image. And then we don't need much for the mouse, we just need him waving. So there he is, sitting on there and waving. Now, as I say, once I've created all of that, I can throw it into an edit program, restack those layers, and I've got absolute control over the camera movement and how those layers build up. Now, here's the project as I'm building it, and you can see that I've built this in, against my better judgment, I've built this in Final Cut Pro. I'm not quite sure. I do love working with Final Cut Pro. It's very fast, it's very easy. But Adobe Premiere is much better in many ways. I use Final Cut Pro a lot because I can work fast in Final Cut Pro. But when it comes to starting to build layers, Premiere is the king, really. And I should have built this in Premiere, and I may well rebuild it in Premiere later. This is just a first draft. So you can see that I've rebuilt these layers, all of these individual layers here, and you can see that that allows me to, so you can see here, this is a very complex image of the cartoon man underwater with fish. All of the background needs to be moving because it's underwater, and so I've split this up into separate layers, animated each layer, and then applied visual effects on each layer to control what the image looks like. So you can see those layers, and you can see the frog moving here. Each of these fish is animated, it's a different layer, each of these fish. And here's our rower, look, here's the image that I created by separating it into different layers. And you can see I've got a lot more control. All of the different birds, you can see all the birds are swimming about and moving around. Each one of these is a separate layer in here, and I've animated each of these. And you can see I can animate the boat going up the river. So I have a lot more control over the elements of this animation. The other key thing, which of course going back to what we mentioned right at the beginning, is that the original files are just too big on their own to throw into AI. So breaking them down into separate elements means that I can keep the high resolution by animating each of those elements and then putting it back into the edit. So let's have a quick look at this pencil animation. Now this is a very rough first draft here. The camera move isn't quite right, but you can see that I've put those layers back together. It might not look like I have, because what I've done is I've nested these layers into one clip. So if I double click on this nest clip here, you'll see it opens up and you can see all the different layers in here that make up this nested clip. Now the reason I've nested it is because I want each of the layers to move at the same time, so it looks like the camera is moving across them. If I had to animate each of those layers one at a time, then it would just become a bit of a nightmare. So I've nested them into this one clip, and then I can just apply the movement that I want over this one nested clip. So you can see I want the cameras to track along the pencils.
The pencils were heaped.
And then you can hear there's a bit of voiceover down here, look, and then it moves up and my little man is busy doing his sharpening. Then I want to cut to the shot of the cockerel. So I've cut to the wide shot, and then I want the camera to zoom in on the mouse outside the window and then follow the mouse as it flies across the city. Now, as I say, that's a first draft. The camera move isn't quite right. It doesn't quite work. But you can see how building up the layers, I can animate each of the elements and have a lot more control over it. And also, by animating each of those individual layers, when I come back and do second and third drafts, I have much more control over tweaking the timing, tweaking the camera moves, and tweaking the actual movement of each of the individual elements, rather than having to do it as a whole image. It also means that I can create elements that weren't already there. So let's look at this image here. This is one of the pages, and there are about 5 or 6 lines over this image. But if you imagine animating this guy running to the taxi with the cockerel, there's the mouse whizzing past. To stay on this image and animate all of that is probably not going to, well, it isn't going to last long enough to deliver 5 or 6 lines of the story. So we're going to have to create cutaways and other shots, and that means that we're probably going to need to animate the mouse going through shot and the man running into shot separately, and they probably need to be different shots. So what I've done, if I take that out the way and come back to the scene, is you can see I've got that scene here all built up. I've broken it down into different layers, but actually this whole scene is made up of different shots now. So we pan down to reveal the city, and then the mouse zips by. Then we see the man running towards that location where the mouse just ran by and where the taxi is going to turn up, because it's just not going to be that interesting if we stay on that one shot and have things moving in and out of it. So what I've done is I've used AI to create a city background that's in the same style as the city that the artist John Vernon Lord had created here, and I've blurred it a little bit so we can see him running past this cityscape, and then we cut back to the shot with the taxi arriving and the man running up to the taxi. Then we go to the next page, which is the traffic driving up and down the street. It's very simple animation, but that's fitting and appropriate with the style of the animations. So that's kind of how the easiest way, but giving you the most control, to take a classic children's book and turn it into a television animation.